Well, today we are very fortunate to be at Our Lady of Guadalupe Trappist Monastery here in Oregon. And we are delightedly going to have a chance to talk with Father Casey Bailey. In fact, here he is. Come this way.
Michael, welcome.
Oh, Father, it's so good to see you again. How have you been?
I've been good. And yourself?
Very well. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting us to be here with you today.
We're really happy, all of us, me included, obviously, to have you here with us and talk about Jesus as a seeker of God.
How can you beat that?
Yes, indeed.
Well, let's go find a place to sit and talk.
All right. Excellent. Thank you. Here we go.
We are really fortunate today to be at Our Lady of Guadalupe Trappist Monastery here in the beautiful valley, and we are really blessed today to have with us as our guest Father Casey Bailey. Okay, Father Casey has been a dear friend for many, many years. As you know, we are working on Jesus by Jose Pagola, and we'll get right into that. But first of all, thank you so much for being with us today, Father.
You're welcome, and thank you for coming.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you for being here.
This is a treat to be here with you and with your wonderful community. Well, tell us, before we jump into this, tell us a few things about yourself, if you would.
So my name is Casey Bailey, and I'm a monk here at Our Lady of Guadalupe, Trappist Abbey. I've been here since 1989.
Wow.
And before that, I was a Jesuit for 14 years.
Really?
Missionary in Nepal.
In Nepal.
For 6.5 years. And my experience of seeking God in all things, and in particular seeking God in this place, seems to be the primary relationship of my life, if that doesn't sound too ostentatious or presumptuous.
That's fantastic. Excellent. Well, in fact, the chapter that I ask you to speak with us today is the chapter on Jesus as a seeker of God.
Yeah.
So that's terrific.
That's where we are.
That's where we are.
I guess all disciples of Jesus are.
And we're always looking for something else, for something broader and deeper as we go along in our study.
Indeed.
How did you come to be a Trappist monk?
That's a question to which I could spend the whole rest of our time together giving an answer.
We have loads of time, haven't we?
My briefest answer would be what I tell people when they ask this question. The Ignatian ideal, having been a Jesuit when I was 14 years, is contemplation in action. And so I tell people I was a complete failure at contemplation in action.
Is that right? You decided just to go directly to contemplation.
That there was a need for a deeper contemplative life.
Wow.
And so I came to the monastery looking for that, and I'm still here.
That's fantastic. Let's see, this monastery was originally in New Mexico, was it?
In Pecos, New Mexico.
In Pecos, New Mexico.
That's right.
When did it move up here?
1953, 54. The first group of monks came in 53, and then the rest of the community followed.
How large is the community?
We are 15 now.
Wow.
So
excellent. Oh gosh, that's just great.
We could use a few vocations.
A few more?
So,
Am I too old?
Well, you have other commitments.
I do have other commitments. Let's not go there. That's wonderful. That's just great. Well, when we look at Father Pagola and what he has to say in this particular book, and we've used this book continuously over the last 7 years for various things. The first year that I actually did one of these series, which was 7 years ago, it was strictly on this particular book, and we went through piece by piece, 14 different lectures in those days, and that was all live and in person. Wow, gosh,
it's well worth that.
It really is. It's a fantastic piece. It is. So when we look at the idea of Jesus as a seeker of God, what jumps out to you in that? Because we'll very often tend to think of Jesus, well, he was God. What was he looking for? What jumps out to you in that?
At the beginning of this third chapter, Father Pagola says, the desert seems to haunt the Hebrew experience. That the people of Israel were born in the desert. He doesn't go all the way back to Abraham. He seems to start with Moses. briefly alluding to Moses, but it made me think all the way back to Abraham. My father was a wandering Aramean who went west where he knew not.
Yeah.
And so Jesus as a son of God, son of Mary, son of Israel, seems also to be haunted by the experience of God in the desert. So we read, of course, in the Synoptics of his meeting with John the Baptist, his baptism,
yes.
and then his going and spending 40 days and 40 nights in the desert.
Off to the desert, yeah.
But I wonder if he wasn't there longer before meeting John the Baptist. It's just speculation, but this, to our reckoning, young man, not so young in their reckoning, I would guess, but this desire for seeking God in the wilderness, Abraham, Moses, I think of Elijah.
Yeah, absolutely.
All the prophets really at one point or another in their lives go apart, whether literally into the desert or not. Yeah. There's something about the stripped down nature of a desert topography.
Absolutely.
That beckons an openness to the mystery of God. And that seems to be very much part of the life of Yeshua ben Miriam of Nazareth, Jesus, son of Mary of Nazareth. It's typical rather than atypical for anyone who's seeking God in the Hebrew experience, it seems.
To go into the desert.
Yeah.
You've been in the desert yourself before.
Somewhat, yeah. Actually, I had a sabbatical in 2015, and I spent 7.5 months at Marymount Hermitage in Idaho, in Adams County, which your wife tells me is not the richest county in Idaho. In fact, it's the poorest.
Not Adams.
And
absolutely.
Spending 7.5 months in Hermitage was a very interesting experience.
How about that? When was that?
2015.
2015.
Yeah.
Okay. My goodness.
Everything in my experience there, I say everything, almost everything, is the sky.
Yes. Yes.
And
there's so much of it.
Exactly.
When you're out in the desert plains, there's so much sky. Yeah.
And that openness to transcendence, and it heightens both the thirst for and the sense of God, whether experienced as presence or absence, or both,
or a little of each. Yeah. Well, and as Pagola puts it, and other places as well, really up until this point of the baptism, Jesus was really living what he refers to as his secret life.
Yes.
The secret life of Jesus. We don't know what happened.
Exactly.
We don't know.
Yes.
Those 28, 30 years, we don't know. In fact, many, as I'm sure you're well aware, biblical scholars pretty much leave the infancy narratives and all that kind of the side. Oh, that's nice. Okay.
Midrash.
Midrash. That's nice. Okay. But they don't really get serious until this moment of baptism. So we know things about him. We know what a craftsman would have been doing in those in those growing up years with his father and whatnot. But what he was actually up to. So when he came to this, it must have been a fascinating place in his own mind and heart and soul, that he was going to expand this whole thing. And then does he run into John, do you think, or was he intentionally looking for him?
Good question. John,
presumably in the story they were cousins.
Right.
But was he out looking for John? What do you think?
John already has a following.
He does. Fairly large, apparently.
Yes, and a very popular prophet with those who are out of power. I want to go back a little bit to his secret life in Nazareth, about which, as you say, we know nothing for sure, except I think we do know the poverty of it.
Yes.
And the oppression of it.
Yes.
So, there's speculation that Joseph went to Nazareth with Mary because it's only 6 to 8 kilometers away from Sepphoris, which was a Roman garrison town.
Right.
Maybe there was work there.
Probably work. Absolutely, yes, exactly.
I was watching with our community some months ago now one of the great courses on the geography of Palestine in the first century. And according to this particular professor, Herod Antipas, in his building program, in addition to the taxes of the Roman government, was taxing up to 42%
Think of that.
of the crops
Yeah.
of the peasants.
Yeah.
In
Who
order to
already
feed his
had
cities.
almost nothing.
Who already almost had nothing, that's right. And they were traditionally diversified farmers and gardeners who sold their produce, but Herod wanted grain for his cities.
Sure.
So not only taxing up to 42% of their profits, but introducing monoculture.
Yeah. Yes,
or,
exactly. Yeah.
Or more like monoculture today, grains, which depleted their own diet.
Yeah.
So Jesus, as a craftsman, he knew this poverty radically and deeply, even if he wasn't literally a farmer. But you can tell from his parables that he knew all about farming.
He understood it very well.
Yeah.
Yeah, he really understood it.
So John the Baptist's radical call for conversion, teshuva, turning, whether Jesus was directly seeking him or not, this radical sense of the reign of God as something very different from what's going on now, and having to go back to the desert to find out what it is. Just as Moses had been in the desert, fleeing Pharaoh. Think of Antipas, Pharaoh.
Yeah.
And then the mission of leading the people out, Israel being born in desert experience. So I don't know how to answer whether he was specifically seeking John, but he and John were both seeking a baptism, a renewal that will turn the world upside down.
Yes.
Teshuva, convert the world to the reign of God. And that seems to be, I want to say it stronger than it seems to be, that is the dominant theme of Jesus' life and death and resurrection. The world needs to be different to respond to and live within the covenant that God is offering. Baptism of fire before baptism of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
So John is expecting apocalypse.
Yes, he is. Well, so many apparently of the Jews were expecting that.
At that time,
and Jesus was a great disappointment to some of them, at least for a while.
And apparently to John too in prison.
Yes.
So you remember when, Pagola doesn't allude to this in this chapter, but when John is imprisoned by Antipas and it looks like death is coming, and indeed does come, he sends disciples to ask Jesus, are you he?
Go talk to this guy. Find out who he really
or
is.
are we to wait for another? And Jesus says, go back and tell John that the sick are healed, the dead are raised, and the poor have the good news of the kingdom, the reign of God proclaimed to them. And blessed is he who is not scandalized by me.
Yeah, by the way, exactly. Oh, that's great. And then he will go in a very different direction from John in John's austerity and all. Jesus really says, no.
Banquets.
Let's try it this way instead. Exactly. Away he went,
I loved it in Pagola when he says, well, John welcomed prostitutes and tax collectors for baptism. I also loved it when he said, another footnote, there's speculation that people entered from the east end of the river and came out on the west towards Jericho, which was the original occupation after Moses. Yeah. He says, we can't prove this, but some people speculated. Well, Jesus isn't just inviting prostitutes and tax collectors to be baptized, he's inviting them to banquets. The man eats with sinners.
He does, and that was one of the most scandalous things of all. That was completely prohibited as far as Jewish tradition would have been considered, or Jewish law with unclean and impure. Yeah, he sat right down with these guys.
Yes.
He let them touch him.
Yes.
Lepers, he would reach out and he'd touch the guy.
Exactly.
That was no, you don't do that.
Exactly.
But it wasn't. He wasn't not just frightened of it. He welcomed it. He jumped into the middle of it.
He jumped right into the middle of it. You're right. Also, he mentions Samaritans in addition to tax collectors, the hated heretics.
Horrid people.
An 800-year-old argument at that point. Yeah. He doesn't mention, and I was thinking as I was reading it, remember the Roman centurion whose servant Jesus heals? And the centurion says, "You don't have to come to my house," because it would have rendered him unclean.
Yes.
Just say the word, and my servant will be healed. And Jesus says, this is incredible.
Yeah.
I have not found such faith in Israel.
Yeah.
A Roman centurion?
Really? A Roman centurion.
And
the hated Roman centurion. And the centurion, he was in charge. The in-charge hated Roman.
Faith greater than he's found in Israel. And the servant is healed.
And he doesn't go to the guy's house. He's more than willing to.
Right.
Which is interesting all in itself. He's more than willing to do that. But the centurion says, no, don't do that. He says, I'm a man of authority. I know how this works. Okay?
Exactly.
Jesus says, whoa, where'd they get this guy?
So it really is taking John the Baptist and broadening the understanding of the kingdom. Also, I was thinking when I was reading that of the Syrophoenician woman. And she's drawing Jesus into a place that he doesn't seem to want to go. It's interesting that he's up there in the Tyrian Phoenician territory in the first place. He's outside.
What's he doing up there?
What's he doing up there? But she, when he says, it's not right to give, and I'm told the Greek is the house dogs, so the puppies, not the curs. It's not right to give what belongs to the children to the house dogs. And she says, yeah, but Lord, even the house dogs eat the crumbs.
Remember this. Yeah, exactly.
And he says, your faith is great. Indeed, her faith is great. She just moves right past the insult. Your daughter is healed.
But just the idea even that you can almost see the change in him. We tend to think sometimes that Jesus has got the whole thing together from beginning to end. Now you can see the changes, and you can almost see him thinking about what she said.
Like the Roman centurion, she's pulling something.
You're right about that. Wouldn't have thought. Yeah, okay.
She's pulling something out of him. I also, some people would question the historicity of this, even especially because it's John's gospel and it's later. But Mary pulls something out of Jesus at Cana.
Oh yes.
Woman, what is your concern to me?
So
my hour has not come. Do whatever he tells you.
I love that. It's this mother, thing. And he's complaining again, as usual. Just like, it's okay, just do whatever he says.
It's almost, I don't say this literally, but from the text, it almost seems that she knows him better than he knows himself.
Absolutely.
She is a Jewish mother.
Absolutely, she is.
I apologize for the stereotype.
But she's any mother. She's any mother devoted to her children, who's heard all the complaining over the years. And, as you're growing up, all the things that happen. And just, whatever he tells you, just do it. Don't pay attention to it.
So Jesus' desert experience is in itself a development, and humanly speaking, he keeps developing.
He does.
He keeps developing.
He really does.
He keeps seeking the truth of God.
So how does all of this fit into the notion of him as a seeker of God? How does this foundation piece, how does this play into that notion of him as a seeker of God? Once again, excuse me for jumping in quickly here, but the theme running through this entire series is the evolutionary process of morality. How do we come to be, Homo sapiens, moral beings? Where did that come from? Some things happened along the way. In one of the other conversations, we talk about the notion of language, the development of language in primitive Homo sapiens as being a key ingredient in forming community. And perhaps out of this forming of community comes the notion eventually of morality and a sense of ethic needs that can be shared and taken care of one another. How does this play out as we go along with our conversation here in terms of Jesus epitomizing in many ways the notion of morality? That's kind of the final thrust of this entire series is, at least in the Western world, Jesus, who he was, what he brought to life, changed everything. Whether we believe it or not, depending on your background or whatever, it changed everything.
Commitment of a Christian disciple is certainly to that effect.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
For sure. Yeah.
So what do you think? What do you think about that? The notion of him choosing a different way of life, all the while seeking this notion of God and the reign of God.
If we can go back a second to
It's
Homo
all yours.
sapiens.
Go back as far as you want.
Okay.
That goes back about 3-5 million years. Whatever you want.
Indeed. Even Yuval Harari would agree with that.
Yes, probably
Sapiens,
so.
yeah.
Maybe, yeah.
If he wouldn't agree with a lot of other stuff we're saying. Human beings forming community through language, I think for a Judeo-Christian understanding of a substratum to that reality, our capacity for doing that is simply, and especially with a Christian anthropology, the commitment to God being love. So love makes possible human community and drives authentic human communication. And what comes to be understood in Christian seeking of God, development of doctrine along the lines of St. John Henry Newman, Trinitarian intercommunication. So that love is more than simply a sociobiological survival mutation. I'm not saying that it doesn't operate on that level, but it's more than that.
Yeah, absolutely more.
It's an archetypal reality that goes all the way back to and comes all the way from ultimate reality as Father loving Son, Son loving Father, and their mutual love generating the Holy Spirit. Pagola alludes to Jesus' experience, although he doesn't like calling Jesus a mystic, because he equates...
Yeah, at one point he
equates mysticism with seeking inner harmony, and he really wants to emphasize Jesus' social orientation towards proclaiming the reign of God. I really don't think those are two separate things. But
in fact, I was surprised when I ran across it and thought, oh, that's a different view of mystical than I would think of.
Me too, yeah, me too. But this to say that Jesus, knowing himself as the beloved Son of God, rising up out of the water, this teshuvah, and the Spirit descending as a dove, whatever that means, and that orienting him to his mission, is, I think, at its base, and also its ultimacy. I'd say both, substratum base and ultimacy. It's an experience of love. And by love, what I mean here from the Hebrew is an experience of God's hesed, his covenantal fidelity to his people.
Right.
And I also love this in the Hebrew experience, rahamim. Rahamim, which is feminine, which literally means womb love. Also, hesed is a masculine.
Complete bond of love. Yeah.
Complete bond of love. So Jesus, in Christian understanding, is the incarnation of this mystery of the love of God. And of course we get the Greek terms subsequently, agape, philia, and eros.
Yes, all three of those
Eros
loves.
is also in God.
Absolutely.
As a specific love.
Yeah.
So Jesus seeking God and wanting to share the experience of the reign of God's love with his oppressed people, which ultimately comes to mean all people, is a seeking of love.
Yeah.
And it comes through so clearly. We had this gospel on All Saints in the Beatitudes. Matthew's Sermon on the Mount, Luke's Sermon on the Plain.
Yeah.
Jesus finally isn't about anything other than the truth of love. Seems to me.
Well, and once
In
again,
his seeking of God.
yes, absolutely, and that I think is the propellant forward in the seeking of God is founded in this notion of love.
And Christian morality.
Yes.
It's finally about love.
It is. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
I'll say this even as we're being recorded. We used to say when I was studying
Well, I need to edit this piece out. Or?
maybe. We used to say when I was studying theology in Berkeley
Sure.
at the Jesuit school, Jesus came proclaiming the kingdom or the reign of God in Pagola's terms, and we got canon law.
How did that ever happen? It just seems so completely.
And we didn't just get canon law; we made it.
See, and that's the most ridiculous part of all. We invented all of this.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
this was not Jesus. This was an invention along
The
the
reign
way.
of God.
But your notion of this whole thing based in the idea of love, and well, back to St. John, God is love.
Not God has love, but God is love.
God is love. I have said in the past in other conversations and whatnot that there are no adjectives in God. God is all nouns.
Yeah.
So he's not merciful, he is mercy.
Yeah.
He is not just loving, he is love. And that jumps right out, I think, in this notion with Jesus. And I think you were saying earlier with the baptism, with the dove coming down and all, and then there's
My beloved
the whole
Son.
thing of this is my beloved Son, in whom
Beloved,
I am well pleased. Okay, this is my beloved Son. The whole thing starts off with a love quote.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
and Jesus takes it from there.
Yeah. God is love.
That must have been kind of a jolt for John, don't you suppose? Trying to put everything together and all of a sudden, what?
Yeah.
It must have been quite a thing for him.
Yes, because I want to be fair to John the Baptist.
Of course.
And, not knowing him at all, but we could probably almost say, for John, God is justice.
Yes, I think so. Yeah. Yes.
But of course, John also knew Hesed and Rahamim.
He did. Well, he'd grown up apparently in the Qumran community, a very, very rigid way of seeing life. And there's lots of that in the world today, at the present time.
For sure.
But that whole thing.
And probably in one way or another, that rigidity that I'm not calling John a fundamentalist, but
No.
I come from an evangelical fundamentalist background, so I can speak that way
Absolutely.
or this way.
Absolutely.
That rigidity or that capacity for rigidity exists in all of us.
It does.
And Jesus, I love it when he also says, with regard to John, well, John's out there in the desert. What did you go out to see?
Yeah. What did you think you were going to see? This reed shaking in the wind? What did you think it
Or
was?
someone dressed in fine clothes, a prophet and more than a prophet. He came not eating and drinking, and you said he was mad. He's possessed by a demon. The Son of Man comes eating and drinking, and you say a glutton and a drunkard. But wisdom is proved, it's justified, is manifested, and I would say with wisdom, love, by all her children.
Oh,
So-
see, that's
Different vocations.
Another yes, that's a lovely piece, though, to tie wisdom, of course, in with the notion of love and within this propellant of Jesus toward seeking God.
Yes.
And I think he must have actually been a seeker,
Yes.
not just
yes.
wandering along saying, "I do that." No,
Right.
actually seeking as he was going.
For sure. And the end of that verse you were citing from the first epistle of John, God is
God
love.
is love.
The person who lives in love lives in God, and God lives in
and
that
God
person.
lives in that person.
So noun, yes, but also verb. Love
Yes.
is a
Yeah.
dynamism. I love it when Buckminster Fuller says, God is not a noun, God is a verb.
Well, that too.
So, not an adjective or an adverb.
I'll go for that. There's no adjectives.
The dynamism.
Well, in some place, I think verbs and nouns coexist.
Indeed.
Yeah,
And
the one is just the action form of the other. I think that's exactly right.
Very good, very good. Another aspect to this for me, in terms of morality, back to the desert.
Absolutely.
Moses' experience of the burning bush which is not consumed. So Moses is fleeing Pharaoh,
Mhm.
having tried to arbitrate a fight,
Yes,
and,
exactly.
and also having killed an
Yeah,
Egyptian.
happened to have killed this guy. Yeah.
Yeah, so he's out there in the desert and seeing this sight of a bush on fire which is
Mhm.
not being burned up,
Mhm.
and then hearing the voice from the bush, Ehyeh asher ehyeh. Because there's no clear distinction in classical Hebrew between present and future tense, it gets variously translated.
Okay.
I am
yes.
who I am.
Yes. Yeah.
I am who I will be. I am who I am becoming.
Yes.
Or just I am,
Mhm.
Ehyeh asher ehyeh,
Yeah.
which, being a transcendental divine word, cannot be pronounced out loud.
Yeah. Can't say it out loud.
So it immediately gets put in the third person causative,
Mm-hmm.
he who causes to be, Yahweh.
Yeah.
which you can't say without internal and external breath.
Yeah.
Yahweh.
Yeah.
Our Father Bernard used to like to say, our previous abbot, the Holy Spirit is the breath of our breath.
Mm-hmm.
But in any case,
Well, and the title for this series I'm doing right now is In Principio Erat Verbum. In the beginning was the Word. Okay.
beautiful.
Elaine Park gave that to me. We were talking about all of this long ago. She said, actually, I don't know what to use as the title for this. And she said, oh, yes, you do. You've already done it. So that notion of the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Erat Deus.
And the word is ineffable.
Ineffable.
And of course, Yeshua, the Hebrew
Yeah.
for Jesus,
Yeah.
the name he was literally given, Yeshua
Yes,
means
yeah.
Yahweh saves.
Mhm.
Yahweh
Yes,
liberates.
Yes, yeah.
So the third person causative, Ehyeh asher ehyeh,
Mhm.
first person, third person causative Yahweh, gets read out loud or spoken out loud as Adonai, the Lord.
Adonai.
Hearing that includes for Moses a mission. He doesn't want to go back to Egypt.
Yeah, no.
His troubles are just beginning.
Yeah, that's not a good idea.
But God says to him, well, if they don't understand what I'm saying, Ehyeh asher ehyeh,
Yeah.
Yahweh, Adonai, tell them I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They should be able to pick up on that.
Hopefully that'll ring a bell.
And
Yeah.
bring them back out here.
Mhm.
So I want to compare that to Jesus. If that's Moses' mission in love, which haunts the Hebrew experience
Mhm.
beginning in the desert, Jesus' mission of love, mediated through the baptism of John the Baptist, is also go to the people and proclaim the reign of God,
Reign of God.
and that it's imminent. Ontos. I love Raimundo Panikkar along these lines too. Raimundo Panikkar says, well, yeah, ontos, the Greek of the New Testament, it can mean is in you, but ontos, he says, it's a slippery adjective. He says,
Lots of that going on.
ontos also means among you.
Oh,
But he says,
okay.
It doesn't just mean among you as some kind of overarching disincarnate presence
Mhm.
or archetype or hermeneutic. He says, I prefer between you.
Right within, yeah. Between.
In our relationality, which is
Yeah.
to say Trinitarian.
Yes,
So
yes.
the reign of God, the kingdom of God, the imminence of it, it's like John the Baptist is, there's going to be the baptism of fire and then the baptism of the Spirit, and it's coming, and get ready. And Jesus says, let's have a party.
I've got an idea.
It's here.
Let's have a party. Yes, exactly.
It's right here now. This love,
Yeah.
this which is the basis of the authentic morality of the life of the Trinity among us, the reign of God. We can live it right here and now. All appearances to the contrary, notwithstanding, if we have eyes to see, ears to hear, and most important, if we have hearts to feel. And this also morality, the lev,
Yes.
as the center of the human personality.
I'm so glad that you tied all of these pieces into love, because I think that's exactly where it goes. And when we as Homo sapiens lose that, rid ourselves of it for any number of reasons, worst of all, perhaps political reasons, whatever,
Indeed.
then we really have lost something,
Yes.
and we can't do that.
We've
We
lost
have
our
to
real
do that.
identity
We have.
as the image and likeness of God.
Absolutely. We are no longer in the Jesus capacity of seeking. We've cut ourselves off from that.
And Jesus gives everything. You know, the whole Paschal mystery, his passion, death, and resurrection, are about the surrender and the triumph of love.
Yes.
I also,
Yes.
in this third chapter, also, Pagola doesn't go into this, but I was thinking as I was reading it, the temptations in the desert,
Yeah.
the temptations against love, turn these stones into bread.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm following Johannes Metz here
Sure.
in Poverty of Spirit. Metz says, it's not just his immediate hunger, it's a question about his messiahship, his mission, his ministry, his proclamation of the reign of God.
Yeah.
Is he just going to be a bread king?
Yeah.
He knows we need bread, but he will not reduce us to
Right.
material.
Nor to fall into the trap of general opinion that somehow or other the Messiah will be a ruling king.
Yes.
Will be coming in and
That's
kicking
right.
things around, doing those
Yes.
things. No.
Get rid of the Romans.
Never,
Yeah.
never. That's not part of it.
Right.
And the same thing you say, not a bread king. No. That's not what I'm up to. I like bread. I like
Yes,
wine. Let's have
yes,
a party. But
yes.
that's not my goal.
Right. Without love, becoming a bread king
Yeah.
just becomes either capitalist or dialectical materialist
There you go.
oppression.
A lot of that going on.
Then throw yourself off the parapet of the temple. Angels will come in
Mhm.
Psalm 90,
Sure.
rescue you lest you
Yeah.
dash your foot against the stone. And Jesus says, you shall not tempt the Lord your God. He will not be a magic king.
Mm-hmm.
He will perform miracles, but he's really cagey about it. He doesn't want
Yes.
people to talk about it.
Exactly.
So
Not only
he's-
that, he never does it as a magician would do something like a curing. Always very, very far from that. And almost always, not always, but very often at least, in a very private setting. Okay.
Exactly.
Here, let me take care of those eyes. And don't tell anybody.
Everybody about it.
Immediately they go out and tell somebody. How would you not?
Right.
But
But
yeah.
especially in Mark's gospel, this whole reality of the messianic secret, people aren't going to get this, and they're going to try to turn me into the Davidic king. And so,
yes, exactly.
yeah. So if he won't be a bread king, he won't be a magic king, then Satan,
Mm-hmm.
the enemy of our nature, that which opposes love, shows his whole hand.
Yeah.
Just fall down and worship me.
Yeah, come on, just do this.
All the kingdoms of the world will be
Give
yours.
you everything.
It
whatever you
belongs
want.
to me, which is already a lie. One of the titles for Satan is father of lies. And by implication, so says Metz, you can forget the passion and death.
Yeah.
I'll give it all to you.
Yeah.
And Jesus goes again to the heart
Mhm.
of the Jewish tradition. If the desert is the heart, the verbal word desert heart of that is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord
Yeah.
is your God, Lord
Yeah.
alone. Shema Yisrael, you shall love the Lord your God with your whole heart and strength, soul.
Everything.
So going back to that, he definitively says no to Satan. And the synoptics say Satan was gone until his time,
Yes.
which
Yeah.
we mean the passion and
Yeah.
death. Or
Yeah.
clearly the synoptics are alluding to that. So in saying yes to this love, according to Metz anyway, and I think he's probably right, Jesus, whatever he knew humanly or didn't know at that point, you wouldn't have to be God, and I believe Jesus is God, but you wouldn't have to be God to know that if you're going to go proclaim this radical message of love in that cauldron of snake pit in some ways of
Yes,
social,
very much so.
political, cultural, and I'm sorry, also religious opposition, defenseless,
Yeah.
in unconditional love, you're going to have some trouble.
Yeah.
Big trouble
Oh, that's
of
just
one
great.
of one form or another.
Yeah. And you have to know that.
And you have to know that. So this also seems a key to I want to say, both authentic Judeo-Christian morality, or any authentic morality.
Yeah.
It's like to hang on to love without the subterfuges that Satan's offering
Yeah.
comes at a price. And the price is the Paschal mystery.
Well, it is. But once again, all hinged, as you were saying earlier, on the notion of love. that has to be the compelling force from beginning to end. Oh, this has been so grand. Thank you so much
Well,
for
thank
taking.
you.
Oh, this has just been a treat.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much
Thank
for
And you got
spending
me to
this
read
time
more
with
of the
us.
book. I have to finish it now.
You need to go back and do some more work. Yeah,
I
it's
do.
a dandy.
It's
It's
a
got,
wonderful book.
as it gets further and further, it just becomes more and more compelling as it goes. But this has been an absolute treat, Father. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much for
Michael.
being with us.
Thank you.
And perhaps we can do something similar again.
Great. It's very much my privilege, and
I love it.
thank you for this conversation.
Oh, absolutely. And thanks to all of you for being with us again today. And of course, blessings always.